The Senate will come to order. Chaplain Dr. Barry Black will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Lord God, you are holy, and we daily experience the unfolding of your prevailing providence. Lord, we're thankful that those who continue to seek you will eventually find you. Help us to make you our choice and our source of hope. As our lawmakers seek to serve you by making choices that honor you, purify their intentions, that they will say what they believe and will act consistent with their speech. Lord, keep them aware of how their thoughts, words, and deeds affect the good fortune of those in need. Sustain the hurting people in our nation and world, carving tunnels of hope from mountains of despair. We pray in your invincible name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 8, 2025. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Ted Budd, a senator from the state of North Carolina, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Edward L. Artau of Florida, to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of Florida.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, for decades, Democrats and Republicans have regularly cooperated to swiftly confirm the many, many individuals selected by each president to serve in their administration. Regardless of the party in the White House, both sides have long agreed that a president deserves to have his or her administration in place quickly. That doesn't mean we don't disagree, but it does mean when nominees are held up, opposed, or blocked, it's for a legitimate purpose, not for leverage and partisan games to score political points at the expense of public safety, end quote. Let me just repeat that, Mr. President. That doesn't mean we don't disagree, but it does mean when nominees are held up, opposed, or blocked, it's for a legitimate purpose, not for leverage and partisan games to score political points at the expense of public safety. Again, end quote. Now, Mr. President, none of those words are original to me. So far, I have simply been quoting the Democrat leader from back in 2022. But his words perfectly summarize the longstanding tradition of the Senate, a tradition that Democrats have destroyed this year. Mr. President, the Democrat leader correctly stated, and again I quote, "For decades, Democrats and Republicans have regularly cooperated to swiftly confirm the many, many individuals selected by each president to serve in their administration," end quote. Now, on a practical level, that's looked like expediting individual nominees and blocks of nominees by using unanimous consent or voice vote, which a way, as you know here in the Senate, Mr. President, of moving things along more quickly. During President George H.W. Bush's 4 years in office and President Clinton's first 4 years, both presidents had 98% of their civilian nominees, get this, 98% confirmed through unanimous consent or voice vote. George W. Bush, President Bush, and President Obama both had 90% of their civilian nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote in their first terms. And then we get to President Trump's first administration. Democrats, upset at the president's election, introduced an unprecedented new level of partisanship into the historically bipartisan confirmation process, forcing time-consuming votes on civilian nominees who would once have gone by unanimous consent or by voice vote. But even so, Mr. President, despite this new level of partisanship introduced by Democrats, both President Trump in his first term and President Biden had more than half of their nominees confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Well, fast forward to today. President Trump has been in office for 8 months, and he has not had one single civilian nominee confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote. Not one. Democrats have dragged out the process of every single nominee, even on nominees they ended up voting for by large margins. It's Trump derangement syndrome on steroids, Mr. President. That's right. Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. If this were a matter of historically bad nominees, as the Democrat leader tried to claim, then Democrats wouldn't be voting for a number of these nominees in committee or supporting them on final passage. No, Mr. President, this isn't about the quality of the candidates or any other substantive issue. This is simply the world's longest, most drawn-out temper tantrum over losing an election. Democrats can't stand the fact that President Trump was elected. And so they've destroyed decades upon decades of Senate precedent and turned a historically bipartisan process into an exercise in petty partisanship, an exercise in petty partisanship that is doing a profound disservice to the American people. Because, of course, Democrats' actions have consequences. First and foremost, those consequences are delays in filling essential positions throughout the administration, in our government, the people's government. Empty desks do not help the government function, and unnecessary delays rob a duly elected president of the team he needs to carry out his responsibilities. Dragging out confirmations also ties up the Senate floor. As the senior senator from Minnesota said last year, in what I would say were much less dire confirmation circumstances, and I quote, "As the Senate spends more of its time working on nominations, this leaves less time for legislating on issues that are important to the American people," end quote. Well, thanks to Democrats' historic obstruction, that is even more true today. We are, in fact, as the senior Democrat from Minnesota said, at risk of becoming, and I quote again, a full-time employment agency, end quote. Mr. President, this situation has become unsustainable. To clear the current backlog of nominees on the calendar and in committee, we would need to take another 600 votes before the end of the year. Now, let me just repeat that to put it into context. To clear the current backlog of nominees on the calendar and in committee, we would need to take another 600 votes. Now, to put that number in perspective, that's more votes than this record-breaking Senate has taken all year up until now. And again, that's just for nominations that have already been sent to Congress, not those that are going to be forwarded and that we're going to have to process here additionally on top of the 600 votes between now and the end of the year. There literally are hundreds more nominations to come from the administration. So if Democrat obstruction continues, as Democrats have made abundantly clear that it will, there is no practical way that we could come close to filling all the vacancies in the 4 years of this administration, no matter how many hours the Senate works. And so, Mr. President, we've got a crisis, and it's time to take steps to restore Senate precedent and codify in Senate rules what once was understood to be standard practice, and that is the Senate acting expeditiously on presidential nominations to allow a president to get his team into place. And so this afternoon I'll be taking the necessary procedural steps to amend the rules. It is an idea, as I said earlier, with a Democrat pedigree. The senior Democrat, senator from Minnesota, along with her colleague in the Democrat caucus, the junior senator from Maine, made a similar proposal in 2023, which would have codified in Senate rules the longtime Senate precedent of en bloc nominations, of moving nominations in groups. Our measure is not as extensive, I should say, as that of my Democrat colleagues. It only applies to nominees at the sub-cabinet level and not to Article III judicial nominees as theirs did. But the proposals share the same objective, and that is providing for confirming groups of nominees all together so the President can have his team in place and so the Senate can focus on the important legislative work in its charge. Or to quote the senior Democrat from Minnesota on her very similar proposal, and I quote again, "This common sense reform will help improve efficiency and make sure we're able to fill positions that are vital to our national security, economic success, and more," end quote. Mr. President, 8 months of petty partisanship is long enough. This Senate has cast more votes up to this point than any Senate going back to the 1980s. We have been in more hours than any Senate going back a couple of decades. This historic obstruction ends now. Democrats have destroyed Senate precedent, and we're going to fix it. Fix it and ensure that in the future, duly elected presidents of both parties are able to get their teams in place without unnecessary delay so that they can fulfill their responsibilities to the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
Democratic leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Well, Mr. President, on Friday, we learned the U.S. economy added only 22,000 jobs for the month of August, a paltry number, an abysmal number, worse than even the already low expectations. Donald Trump has steered our economy straight into an iceberg, and the SS Trump is sinking before our eyes. And I warn my Republican colleagues, the longer you remain aboard, the greater the danger you face of sinking with the ship. Because if one thing is certain, it's that the American people don't want to be paying more for things as simple as coffee and beef, fruits, vegetables. They don't want to see their electric bills go up. They don't want to see their rent go up. And they don't want to see it harder to find a job. But that's exactly what's happening right now. Senate Republicans remain on board this ship, the SS Trump, at their own peril. It's sinking. And Republicans know perfectly well what Donald Trump is doing is without precedent. Oh, their favorite comeback is, well, that's what the American people voted for. They shrug their shoulders. They can't do anything about it. Well, that's nonsense. This summer, big American companies, Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Ace Hardware, and so many others have said they're raising prices or that costs will go up because of the tariffs. Americans didn't vote for that. Oh, no. Americans are about to see their health insurance go up by the highest amount in 15 years. You think they voted for that? No. They didn't vote for more Americans to get sick, although that's what the Trump health care plan will do. They didn't vote for more Americans to die, and that will happen as a result of this big, beautiful, quote-unquote, bill. Americans sure didn't vote for any of that. Americans want us to pass legislation that lowers health care costs, expands people coverage. They do not want us to vote to boot millions off their health insurance. They do not want the closings of hospitals, particularly in rural areas where the hospitals don't have much cushion. They don't want the laying off of doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, so they get less good coverage, and it takes much longer to get it. Americans didn't vote for that, but that's what happened. And here's what the data shows. Americans are fed up with Trump. NBC News Decision Desk Poll, September 7th, 57% disapprove of Donald Trump's job performance, 43% approve. 60% believe America under his leadership is on the wrong track. 61% disapprove of the way he's handling inflation. CBS News, September 3rd to 5th. 56% disapprove of Donald Trump's job performance. 62% oppose new U.S. tariffs on imported goods. So it's no wonder that Americans are winning in state special elections, even in districts that Trump previously won by as many as 10 points from one end of the country to the other. The elections show, these by-elections, these local elections show, Americans reject Donald Trump just several months after he got into office. To put this all together, the story's clear. Donald Trump's sabotaging our economy. He's sending health care costs through the roof. Americans are sick of his failures, which brings us to the work of Congress this month. It's less than 20 calendar days when government funding runs out, and a shutdown will happen if nothing is done. How Congress proceeds is up to our Republican colleagues. They are in charge. They run the House, they run the Senate, they have the presidency. Well, if our Republican colleagues know what's good for the country and good for them, they'll realize that they should no longer remain aboard this sinking ship that Trump is commanding. The greater danger that they will face is sinking with this ship if nothing changes. What Republicans should do then is commit to working on bipartisan legislation to undo some of the terrible things Donald Trump has done during his time in office. Working on bipartisan legislation that has real input from Democrats, that's the way to avoid a shutdown. Of course, there's another path, a far uglier path. Republicans can continue to go at it alone. They can continue to bow down to Donald Trump. They can continue to surrender Congress's constitutional powers over the executive and enable Donald Trump and his evil minion, Russell Vought, as they illegally cancel and steal congressional-approved funding. So if Republicans choose the path of do what we say or go to hell, then they will be the ones paving the bitter road that leads towards a government shutdown. And we Democrats will not accept that. We will not enable Republicans' carnage of this country. We won't bail Republicans out as the cost of health care, groceries, school supplies, rent, electricity, automobiles all go up and up and up. We still have some time to avoid that dismal outcome. We Democrats don't want to see a government shutdown. But avoiding one means Republicans have to show they are serious about having real, substantive, serious negotiation. This week, we need to see signs from Republicans that they are serious about avoiding a shutdown or time will run out. And the American people will know Republicans will be responsible if a shutdown happens. Now on judicial nominations. This one's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that the nominees for the federal bench have gone so low. But under Donald Trump's leadership, his lack of morality, his total egotism, his total self-servingness, they have. Listen to this one, this nominee, Mr. Artau. And this is why Democrats are demanding historical levels of scrutiny. Because that scrutiny reveals all of the corruption going on behind the scenes, just what we learned about Mr. Artau, today's nominee. It's one of the most blatant cases of quid pro quo I have ever seen. While Artau was begging Donald Trump and Republican senators for a judgeship, he was begging them to make him a judge. He was at the same time part of a panel of judges in Florida hearing Donald Trump's defamation case against the Pulitzer Prize Board. This guy sues everybody. That's been his MO for decades. He tries to scare people with idiotic lawsuits that have no basis in law. Well, in this case, he was suing the Pulitzer Prize Board in a case of defamation. Well, Artau was on the panel of judges to hear the case. What would a normal person, you don't need a high degree of honesty, you don't need to be an Eagle Scout to know that this is a direct conflict of interest. And any judge with an ounce of integrity would recuse himself. But of course, Artau stayed on the case, didn't even tell anyone about the conflict of interest. And surprise, 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 Artau ruled in favor of Trump. These are the kind of sleazy people Donald Trump wants on the bench. He has no principles. He has no regard for the rule of law. He picks people who have blind obeisance to him, who will bow down to the king. That's not what judges are supposed to do. That's not what nominees to departments are supposed to do. And he doesn't care if the people he picks are corrupt. He doesn't care if they're liars. He doesn't care if they lack any principle, sense of integrity, fidelity to rule of law. One quality only. Are they pro-Trump? Will they do whatever he wants? That's good enough for a gavel and a robe in this Trump world. And it's good enough for our Republican colleagues who just go along with all of this, knowing how wrong it is, and shrugging their shoulders out of fear, obeisance, or some other untoward emotion. The Senate should reject Mr. Artau today. And I'd also like to say a few words today about the step Leader Thune is expected to take later this evening to begin changing Senate precedent and to go nuclear yet again on nominations. At the end of the last work period, Democrats were working in good faith with Republicans on nomination package to move through this chamber. Senator Thune was very involved. He seemed very willing to come up with an agreement. And then at the last minute, of course, Donald Trump said, literally, to me, go to hell. And the talks fell apart. Was there any integrity? Was there any backbone? Was there any strength to say to Trump, we have an agreement, take a walk? No way. And so now, rather than giving those talks another chance, Republicans would rather change how the Senate operates to weaken this chamber's traditional and powerful sense of deliberation. And if Republicans go nuclear, the historically bad nominees we've seen so far under Donald Trump will get only worse. Let me say that again, because this is the crux of the matter. We all know what horrible nominees he puts up. As I said before, like with Mr. Artau, no sense of integrity, no sense of rule of law, just bow down to Trump. Well, the kind of people confirmed by this chamber this year have been unprecedentedly bad, beyond the pale. Scandal after scandal, expose after expose. Many of them are far worse than any group of nominees we've seen before. Trump has made a mockery of the nominations process. He lacks any sense of principle. He doesn't care if the people he picks are unqualified, if they're liars, if they're corrupt. Sometimes it's almost as if the more corrupt, the better, because then Donald Trump will totally control what they do. It's as if he wants the Senate to confirm people willing to lie for him, to even cheat for him. He wants people who are willing to stand up for him without question. Loyalty is the only quality he seeks, and to hell with the rest. And if you don't debate nominees, if you don't vote on individual nominees, if there's not some degree of sunlight, what will stop Donald Trump from nominating even worse individuals than we've seen to date, knowing this chamber will rubber stamp anything he wishes? I say to my Republican colleagues, think carefully before taking this step. If you go nuclear, it's going to be a decision you will come to regret. I yield the floor. Note the absence of, I yield the floor.
Democratic Whip.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Senate is not in a quorum call.
Good to know. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this past Saturday, the President of the United States of America posted a shocking, grotesque message on social media. Accompanied by an AI-generated image of military helicopters flying over a burning Chicago skyline with explosions in the background, the President of the United States posted that he, quote, loves the smell of deportations in the morning, close quote. And he went on to say that Chicago is, quote, about to find out why it's called the Department of War, close quote. Let me remind you that this outrageous vision of an American city that I love under attack from Trump's Department of War comes from a man who aspires to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. President Trump attempted to walk back his comments yesterday. But let's be clear. The President of the United States essentially declared war on an American city, a city I'm honored to represent. He may think it's a joke. To me, it's no joke. It is unprecedented and dangerous threat by a president against American people. What is the limit to his power, and where is the line to be drawn if a president is able to go to war against a city he also represents? I cannot imagine. But even if we put this aside for a moment, let's consider the justifications President Trump is using for his threat of a beefed-up immigration raid and deployment of the National Guard in the city of Chicago. He claims these extraordinary steps are aimed at reducing crime and getting violent criminals off the streets. Mr. President, you want to reduce crime in Chicago and across this country? Count me in. Let me give you a few ideas of things that you can do as President of the United States which can make a serious difference. Number one, when we take a look at the guns used in crime in the city of Chicago, guess what we find? A large percentage of them comes from a neighboring state of Indiana with lax laws when it comes to background checks on purchases of firearms. If we get a little tougher and we have actual background checks, we're going to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. That's something you can do, Mr. President. You can show some leadership. And when it comes to fentanyl and narcotics, guess what we find? 70% of the crime guns in Mexico are coming in there from the United States. Our gun dealers are selling guns to the cartels in Mexico, which are using them to gun down police and military in Mexico. What an outrage. Why don't we do something about that, Mr. President? It might actually reduce crime. Count me in on reducing crime, but deporting people who are innocent, who have no criminal background whatsoever, is not the answer. We can all agree we should be working together to reduce violent crime. But in this case, we know it's just a front when it comes to the Trump administration. I've learned in the years that I've been involved in politics that when it comes to issues, there's always a good reason and a real reason. So what's the real reason that Donald Trump wants to send National Guardsmen into the city of Chicago? He's targeting Chicago for political theater. He finds objections to crime in communities that are governed by Democrats, but not Republicans. He's attacking Democratic officials so he can distract from the failures of his own policies and scandals plaguing his own administration. He wants us, please, to forget the so-called big, beautiful bill. Remember that one? Trump's budget bill? It's going to take health care protection away from 17 million Americans. And it's going to make it difficult for rural hospitals in my state of Illinois to survive. Why would any president want to take health insurance protection away from 17 million individuals? Why would they want to jeopardize the hospitals that are so critical for survival in rural America? Well, the reason is obvious. The president has decided that he wants to take the revenue from cutting back on health care and provide for tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. Instead of listening to the communities and the families that I represent, he's listening to the fat cats and providing tax breaks for billionaires. What do you think it means in tax breaks for average people? Let's assume you're on the low end of income earning $35,000 a year. How much is the Trump tax break for you? It turns out to be $3 a week. $3 a week. And what if you happen to be Elon Musk, a billionaire with unestablished limits of money that he has raised? We don't know how much it's worth. But how much is the tax break going to be worth, the Trump tax break, for Elon Musk? It's going to be worth $30,000 a week. $3 for the family struggling, $30,000 for Elon Musk. For what? I don't know why. Now, when it comes to the subject of these raids, National Guard and other units of government, there's been a lot of speculation about what the president actually is going to do in his so-called Operation Midway Blitz. So here on the Senate floor, let me set the record straight as to what I know, where it stands. Earlier today, when the administration announced they're calling Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago to crack down on undocumented immigrants with criminal records. However, if their DC experience is any indication, we know most of the people that they'll arrest have no criminal background. They're not rapists, terrorists, murderers, or criminally insane. So this weekend I traveled to the Naval Station, Great Lakes, with Senator Tammy Duckworth and Representative Brad Schneider. There were reports that DHS intends to use the Navy base to assist in these raids. There were concerns that the federal government would operate a sort of deportation command center out on the base. At a productive meeting with leadership on the base, we were assured that the base would not be used as a detention center for detainees. Here is what happened as part of that federal assistance request. The base will provide parking, office space, and the ability to store certain non-lethal munitions for the DHS through October the 5th. Most importantly, the service members at Naval Station Great Lakes will not be aiding in these raids. Naval Station Great Lakes is known to every Navy family. Every recruit to the Navy goes through training at the Great Lakes. Each Thursday, there is a celebration of the completion of their 9 weeks of training. And families come from all over the United States to celebrate their son or daughter who is becoming part of the greatest Navy in the world. That's what they do and do so well and have for decades. Most importantly, the service members of Naval Station Great Lakes will not see the recruitment and training of these young sailors suffer any blow because of the Trump crazed idea of invading the city of Chicago. I've been honored to represent Great Lakes as senator from the state of Illinois and to provide it with the support and resources needed to train the recruits who walk through those doors. My concern is to make sure that no exercise of political theater by the current president was an obstacle to the mission at that base. That appears to be the case, but I'm going to continue to closely monitor the situation. However, as part of our visit to the base, we asked to meet with the Department of Homeland Security, which is going to rent an office building for 30 days. We wanted to get firsthand from them what was going to happen in that operation, the expenditure of federal funds for purposes which we were going to ask them to explain. Do you know what the response was of the Trump Department of Homeland Security when we went to the actual naval base, to the office building which they have rented and is supposedly using as part of this invasion of Chicago? They closed the building. They locked it so we couldn't go inside and announce they were taking administrative leave and would be unavailable to even discuss with us what they're going to do. Why are they running and hiding if they're proud of the president's policy, if they actually believe that they are there to fight crime? I think they know better. They know the politics of this situation. They locked the doors and they refused to make anyone available to 2 senators and a congressman representing that area. They fled so we could not conduct oversight of their secretive effort, and it certainly begs a question. What are they trying to hide? We now have a better understanding of exactly what they want to do. It's all politics. In addition to our visit to Naval Station Great Lakes, I've been seeking answers to the potential military employment because the people of Chicago, and I do, have a right to know. That's why I've used all my tools at my disposal to get to the bottom of this, despite roadblocks by the administration. Last week, I sent a letter to Attorney General Bondi, Secretaries Noem and Hegseth, and FBI Director Patel, requesting immediate information regarding the increased law enforcement and potential military presence in Chicago. I sent a letter to my colleague and friend on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chairman Grassley, requesting an immediate hearing on President Trump's threats to deploy the military to Chicago and other American cities. If this president and this administration want to join in fighting crime on a cooperative, bipartisan basis, count me in. But political theater, visions of Chicago being blown up by a Department of War, I want no part of it. As this situation unfolds, my office remains in constant contact and coordination with state and local officials, community leaders, and my colleagues in Congress. I'll continue to provide updates to Illinois as we learn more. These are scary times. The president is using fear to deflect and drive a wedge among us. Unfortunately, he seems to be succeeding to some extent. But the people of Chicago won't take kindly to a bully and a wannabe dictator. On Saturday evening, thousands of marchers peacefully passed by Trump Tower and filled the streets of Chicago to make their voices heard. They were clear in their call. Mr. President, do not send the military here for political purposes. I was happy to join in a parade in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago to celebrate Mexican Independence Day. These are good people, good families, hardworking, church-going, doing their best in a tough economy to survive. They are not a threat to anyone's safety, and they're certainly not the cause of crime in Chicago. At that celebration, there was an attendee by the name of Liliana. She felt it was important to come out on behalf of many who were scared to leave their homes. Standing on the sidewalk, she said, "We're here, we're not going away, no matter what generation, no matter what threat, no matter what president is in office, we're not going away." Thank you, Liliana. She's right. In the face of threats and intimidation, our immigrant community in Chicago as a whole will stand firm and stand tall. Let us join together as a nation to fight crime and to fight the gun epidemic that is part of violent crime. But arresting or deporting innocent families is not the way to fight crime. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Iowa.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
We are not in a quorum call.
Madam President, for the second time in a week, I come to the floor to implore my Democratic colleagues to stop partisan obstruction of public safety officials. We have 10 highly qualified nominees on the Senate floor right now, waiting for confirmation. Several have blue slips from Democratic senators. All were reported to the floor by voice vote. There's no reason that we shouldn't get them to work for the American people today. As I explained just a few days ago, communities around our country are in desperate need of U.S. attorneys to protect the public and uphold the rule of law. 81% of the Americans think that crime is a large city in large cities is a major problem. If we can agree to put partisanship aside, this body can take a tangible step to address this today by confirming 10 qualified law enforcement officers to their posts. I'm disappointed that my Democratic colleagues have chosen to place partisan obstruction over public safety. I'm here again today to give my colleagues a chance to do the right thing. This blanket obstruction of all nominees is a misguided attempt to score political points. I know that several of my Democrat colleagues agree with me because just a few months ago, some of them stood on the Senate floor and made the same argument that I'm making today. One speech last Congress, the Democratic whip and chairman of the Judiciary Committee said, quote, "Don't stand up and say that you're for law and order, you're for law enforcement, and then turn around and stop the appointment of U.S. attorneys," end of quote. In another speech, the same senator said, quote, "Our communities desperately need top federal prosecutors in place, interested in stopping fentanyl, question mark. I am. Thousands of people are dying. Who's going to prosecute these cases? The U.S. attorneys, 93 of them across the United States. But you can't prosecute cases if you don't have U.S. attorneys there to lead the effort, coordinate the effort with other branches of government." My Democratic colleagues continue to claim that their obstruction is justified because 2 Republican senators placed holds on some U.S. attorneys in the last administration. This compares apples with oranges. One of the senators relented on his hold and allowed U.S. attorneys to be confirmed by voice vote. The other senator ultimately blocked 5 U.S. attorneys. A handful of U.S. attorneys being held last Congress, which I opposed, isn't comparable to the blanket hold on all 93 U.S. attorneys that we're facing today. The strategy this Congress is orchestrated by Senate Democratic leadership and is part of a broader Senate-wide assault on the functioning of the executive branch. At the end of the day, we can just look at the numbers. During the Biden administration, nearly 94% of his U.S. attorneys nominees were confirmed by voice vote. So far in the second Trump administration, 0% of his U.S. attorneys nominees have been confirmed by voice vote. For months, I've repeatedly tried to engage my Democratic colleagues to end their obstruction. I've warned that their tactics ultimately hurt the American people and will lead to lasting damage to the Senate as an institution. I've even offered a compromise where we hold 5 roll call votes to compensate the 5 nominees returned to the president at the end of March. To my great disappointment, my colleagues haven't relented from that strategy, and I hope they'll relent today with my unanimous consent request. I mentioned last week that one of the U.S. attorneys being held up is Daniel Rosen, nominated for the District of Minnesota. Mr. Rosen was reported out of committee by voice vote. He's supported by his home state Senators Klobuchar and Smith, both Democrats. He's a qualified nominee. He should be responding to the horrific mass shooting of children at the Annunciation Catholic Church, but instead is languishing here on the Senate floor as a pawn for partisan obstruction. This needs to end, and it needs to end today. So I now will ask unanimous consent to confirm 10 U.S. attorneys who have been reported out of committee. I hope that my Democratic colleagues will allow these nominees to get to work. Debate, disagreement about policy is to be expected, but should never be at the expense of public safety. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to consideration of the following nominations en bloc. 176, David Waterman, Iowa. 183, Ron Parsons, South Dakota. 257, David Metcalf, Pennsylvania. 258, Bart Davis, Idaho. 316, Kurt Alme, Montana. 317, Nicholas Chase, North Dakota. 318, Leslie Murphy, Nebraska. 319, David Rosen, Minnesota. 320, Eric Seibert, Virginia. Kurt Wall, 321, Kurt Wall, Louisiana. That the Senate vote on the nomination en bloc without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, that the President be immediately notified of the objection.
Reserving the right to object.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. First, let the public know what they're talking about obstruction. 2 hours of debate and a vote on some of the worst nominees we have ever seen. They want to pile them all together. Some of these nominees are the people who know them in their states are appalled that they would be nominated. Trump has chosen his U.S. attorneys for one reason only: blind obeisance to him. That's it. No rule of law, no independence. So, of course, our friends are afraid of 2 hours of debate and a vote, because so many of these nominees are so bad. Historical bad nominees deserve a historical response. So we wanted to come to an agreement with our colleagues to let some of the better ones through, but we couldn't. Not because of our Senate colleagues. Senator Grassley was involved, Senator Thune was involved. We were close to an agreement. And what happened? Donald Trump, who wants these horrible nominees, so many of them, said, "Go to hell." That's what he said. So instead of our Republican colleagues telling Donald Trump, "No, we can work out an agreement that's fair," they said, "Okay." They pulled back. And now what's their alternative? They're ready to detonate Senate precedent altogether and go nuclear on all the nominees. So much for oversight. And before they even do that, now they want to rubber stamp another round of nominees. No scrutiny, no debate. 2 hours of debate and a vote for someone as powerful as a U.S. attorney. Most Americans would agree that's the least we could do. The least we could do. So, no scrutiny, no debate, no consent from us. I want to be very clear. If my colleague from Iowa, who's a good man, wants to resume our negotiations, which we were ready to do, and he knows it, he was part of it, if he's willing to back off threats to go nuclear, we'll be open to having a conversation about a nominees package, including the ones on his list. We'll be open to negotiation just as we were at the end of July, when we were in that room right across the hall from here and ready to have an agreement, when all of a sudden Donald Trump says, "Go to hell," and the Republican leadership says, "Okay, we won't do it," because he doesn't like it, even though he has historically bad, reprehensible nominees. So, if Republicans are dead set on going nuclear, we will not grant consent today. I object.
Madam President.
Senator from Iowa.
Well, obviously, I'm disappointed that my request has been objected to. I hope today that we could set a new direction, put interest of the American people over partisanship. I want to offer to Senator Democratic leader an offer he shouldn't object to because it has both Republican and Democrat supports. If we can't agree to allow 10 U.S. attorneys who've been reported out of committee to be confirmed today, I'm going to make a more modest request. David Waterman is my pick to be U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, highly qualified. He was reported out of committee by voice vote. No recorded objections. My state needs him to get to work. I initially recommended him to President Biden during the last administration, and he was nominated and reported out of committee last Congress. My Democratic colleagues have tried to justify their obstruction by pointing to the hold by then Senator Vance last Congress. Well, Mr. Waterman was one of the 5 U.S. attorneys returned to the president from that hold. So are we going to confirm a nominee who's been submitted to the Senate by 2 different presidents and reported out of committee twice? Seems to me like something the Democrats should not object to. Or are my Democratic colleagues going to continue the objection? Now, here's another one. They've got confidence, surely, in their 2 Democratic senators from Minnesota. I've already spoken about Daniel Rosen, but like Mr. Waterman, Mr. Rosen is well qualified to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. He too was reported out of committee by voice vote, and he's supported by both home state Senators Klobuchar and Smith. Recently, so I encourage my Democratic colleagues to send a clear signal to the people of Minnesota that they think that they ought to have a law enforcement person at their side. The District of Minnesota needs its top federal prosecutor in place to preserve law and order, so we need to confirm Mr. Rosen. So I'm now going to ask unanimous consent to confirm Mr. Waterman and as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, and Mr. Rosen to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. So I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of the following nominations in block. 176, David Waterman, Iowa. 319, David Rosen, Minnesota. That the Senate vote on the nominations en bloc without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, that the President be immediately notified.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. I would, with respect, remind my colleague that all 3 of these people were on our list that we were negotiating and could have been passed with our agreement. Donald Trump said, quote, "Go to hell." You, Republican leader, backed off. So you could have had it done with an agreement, a bipartisan agreement, not a partisan agreement where the Republicans have just choose whoever they want, no matter. So the bottom line, once again, is simple. You want to get these things done? Negotiate an agreement in a bipartisan way. Don't bow down to Donald Trump, who, as I said, has nominated for U.S. Attorney and many other places some of the worst nominees, the most conflicted nominees, the least qualified nominees we have ever seen. I object.
Objection is heard.
You can see the weakness of that objection, because here's somebody that's been nominated by President Biden and President Trump, and you have 2 Democratic senators supporting it. At least in those 2 instances out of 93 that are potentially on hold, could go to do their job. I want to make one final request before I yield the floor. The Senate Judiciary Committee, in that committee, it's common practice to report certain nominees by voice vote. We've been doing it for decades, particularly for non-controversial U.S. attorneys and U.S. Marshal nominees. Under my chairmanship, we only conduct voice votes with explicit consent of the ranking member, and we don't do them if there are any objections to so doing. Recently, I've heard concern that nominees reported out of committee by voice vote may be challenged or face additional obstructions on the floor to further derail the functioning of the executive branch. I sincerely hope this isn't the case. Voice votes are a long-standing practice of our committee and involve complete cooperation between the majority and minority party of the committee. On the Senate Judiciary Committee, despite our differences, the ranking member and I have a good working relationship. When we reach a bipartisan agreement about how to manage our committees consistent with our norms, I hope that every member of this body will respect this agreement. So this is my unanimous request. I ask unanimous consent that no point of order lie with respect to the following U.S. Attorney nominees reported out of the Senate Judiciary Committee by voice vote pursuant to explicit agreement between the offices of chairman and ranking member, whether those nominations are offered individually or pursuant to a resolution. David Waterman, Ronald Parsons, David Metcalf, Bart Davis, Kurt Almey, Nicholas Chase, Leslie Murphy, Daniel Rosen, Eric Siebert, and Kurt Wall.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. Once again, negotiate in a fair, bipartisan way with us, and many of these things could be resolved. Do it in a partisan way, bow down to Donald Trump? No way. I object.
I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, we are living in a time of growing global unrest. China is accelerating its military buildup in the Indo-Pacific. And while I remain hopeful that President Trump can help broker peace between Presidents Putin and Zelensky, Russia's brutal war against Ukraine grinds on. That's why it's more important than ever that we invest in our service members, protect defense spectrum, drive innovation, and strengthen our missile defense systems. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I'm proud to report that this year's National Defense Authorization Act meets this moment. It includes key provisions I secured to modernize our nuclear deterrent and strengthen our national defense. As chair of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, I fought to upgrade the National Nuclear Security Administration's infrastructure. The bill establishes an annual independent assessment of NNSA's progress towards modernization goals, ensuring our nuclear deterrent remains both effective and up to date. It requires the deployment of at least 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles across no fewer than 450 launch facilities, maintaining a force structure capable of deterring any nuclear-capable adversary. It authorizes more than $4 billion for the Sentinel Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Program, and it requires that it be fielded no later than September 30th, 2033. It accelerates the Sea-Launched Nuclear Cruise Missile Program, and it expands experimentation and prototyping authority to all combatant commands, including U.S. Strategic Command at Offutt Air Force Base in my home state of Nebraska. This is exactly the kind of strategic deterrence that makes our adversaries think twice and say, not today. This year's NDAA also safeguards critical defense spectrum. Some in Washington have suggested that the Pentagon is sitting on spectrum bands that could be better used for commercial wireless. That portrayal is both inaccurate and it is dangerous. The reality is these frequencies are not idle. They are the backbone of America's missile defense and intelligence systems. And we should not be allowing federal agencies to sell critical communication channels needed to carry out the Trump administration's priorities, including the Golden Dome Missile Defense Shield. That's why this year's defense bill prohibits any modifications to defense systems in these spectrum's bands, unless top Pentagon leaders themselves deem it absolutely necessary. Earlier this summer, I led the effort to secure, for the first time in law, a carve-out that prevents the Federal Communications Commission from auctioning or reallocating these bands for the next decade. The NDAA provision is consistent with these provisions, ensuring that we strike the right balance, unleashing American wireless innovation while never compromising our national security. We are also preparing for the threats that we cannot yet see. I secured provisions to assess the readiness of the National Disaster Medical System, to modernize our roadmaps for cloud migration and artificial intelligence, and to ensure that our intelligence community has the meteorological and environmental services that it needs. But all of these priorities mean little without investing in the brave men and women who carry them out. That is why I fought to authorize $19 million above the President's budget request to help recover and identify the remains of our fallen service members from past wars and conflicts. The United States military leaves no one behind. And through this bill, we are directing the Pentagon to explore whether local communities can play a more active role in helping develop the department's healthcare facilities, similar to my Chip In for Veterans Act. This is the very least we can do for the troops and the families who have sacrificed so much for the freedoms that we hold dear. Beyond the details, we must keep sight of the bigger picture. Our adversaries, nations that hate America, well, they're sharing weapons and resources and a common goal. They want to weaken American power and dismantle our influence across the globe. The character of war has evolved rapidly. Breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, unmanned systems, hypersonic weapons, next-generation aircraft, and space-based capabilities, they're all reshaping the battlefield. At the same time, we live in a political environment that is too often partisan and divided. Yet on this issue, I believe most of my colleagues agree that we must confront these threats head-on. And that means rebuilding the arsenal of democracy. To do so, we need serious reform at the Pentagon. This year's NDAA delivers, modernizing the budget process, cutting red tape, improving efficiency, and unleashing innovation. This is not partisan. This is not political. This is necessity. Our service members must have the resources they need to carry out their missions and return home to their loved ones. This bill strengthens our military, and it sends a very clear message. America is prepared to meet the moment. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it without delay. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The question occurs on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Crapo, Curtis, Fisher, Graham, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Kennedy, Moody, Sullivan, Tuberville, Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Duckworth, Gallego, Hickenlooper, Hirono, Kim, Lujan, Merkley, Murray, Slotkin, Smith. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mrs. Brett, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Padilla, no. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Welch, no. No. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Moreno, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Budd, aye. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. King, no. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Markey, Mr. Markey, no. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Durbin, no. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Schatz, no. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Ms. Baldwin, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Kane, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schmidt. Aye.